Landon.
Yes, hello.
Welcome to the Finding Meaning in Work podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for hosting me as well. This is a lovely space up here. So where should we start? Maybe let's start with, because you're currently in the middle of a new venture.
Correct.
Maybe let's start with what that's about, and then we can go back
Okay, over the years.
over the years. Yeah.
In the last months, I've set up a talent and HR consultancy partner in kind.
Yeah.
My background has mostly been working with tech companies, but I've kind of built teams all over the world with lots of different positions from tech to product to HR and everything else. And basically decided to set up my own consultancy that takes 20% of anything I make and puts that towards charitable outcomes, which could just be money into, a charity nominated by the company I'm working with. And I also offset the work that I do with not-for-profits, where I can do work for them for free with that funds that I've gathered from the other businesses that are for profit. So I've sort of set that up and got it going, got my first clients, and I'm really excited about it.
Yeah. Congratulations, firstly.
Thank you.
I think what I love to explore with you, I think just how you came about doing this, and not just this, but I suppose your career in talent acquisition. But let's go way back now. So, where did you grow up?
I grew up here in Melbourne.
Nice. Yeah.
Originally, my dad is from LA, so I was always sort of had that family overseas, and we'd go there sort of every year. So it's very much a part of who I am as well, but certainly a Melbourneian through and through.
Yeah. Where did you go to school?
I went to school at Wesley, Malvern Primary to begin with, which was basically like a private school feeder based out of Malvern, which was kind of cool though, because I had a lot of friends after primary school that ended up going to lots of different schools, which suited me nicely. I've always been a bit of the social butterfly. I went to Wesley. It's pretty well known for its musical theatre, which my sister was a big part of. I was not really. I had one singing part in a musical. I played an undertaker, which was probably well typecast, and had a great time with it. But yeah, I think my talents were wasted at Wesley.
Okay. What were you good at Wesley? Well, or what was there anything that
Co-curricular? I was good at skipping school and trying to get out of going to school. I was never like a big one for that. Even, I went to university eventually and I didn't go to any of my lectures. I think it's always been school, uni, my jobs has always been somewhat a vehicle for my social life and to meet people and connections and all that kind of thing, which is partly why I've ended up being a recruiter as well. I'm pretty much the only recruiter I've met throughout the years that actually intended to always do what I do, which is pretty crazy. When I was 16, I knew of executive search and I knew of recruitment as a function of business. I wrote to the CEO of a headhunting company here in Melbourne when I was 16, just to meet with him to find out what kind of degree should I do, what would be involved, what does the real world of being a headhunter look like through your 20s and 30s and everything else. And I really loved what I heard. Part of this was all pushed from my dad, knowing I was great with meeting new people and enjoyed doing that and thought it would be a good career for me to make, money easily and not a big barrier to entry either. I wasn't going to make it through a medical degree. So I found that out at 16, and by the time I turned 18 and started that HR degree, which the person had recommended, I wrote to him again and asked if I could get part-time work doing that. And that started my career at 18, doing 1 or 2 days a week in an executive search firm.
Yeah, wow. We'll come back to that, but maybe at school, I suppose what made you stand out in terms of your social intelligence, let's say?
Well, I rubbed a lot of people well and badly, I would say. I've always been a bit of a polarizing figure, very opinionated, very out there, happy to speak my mind and all those kinds of things, but also super drawn to different people from all over the world and all different walks of life and wanting to sort of find out what makes them tick and also make them tick. So I was definitely a social butterfly type profile through school. I had lots of friends in lots of different areas. It was always somewhat about trying to get on that popularity train to get to go to the parties and get to go to the social events and have fun. It was always somewhat driven through that route, as well as just trying to find my place, which was not necessarily like I wasn't in the musical group. I wasn't in the band group. I wasn't a killer athlete, despite what I look like now. Just kidding. So yeah, I had to sort of just be that profile that could be kind of maybe more funny leaning and be able to rely on my personality and my ability to comfortably meet people and develop like close and warm relationships quite quickly to sort of get by.
Yeah. And I suppose, besides your dad, was that somehow recognized by other people, or?
I definitely did have a lot of friends and was always like quite an out there and vibrant profile, and I think that was certainly recognized for good and for bad.
Yep.
But not in any real meaningful or tangible way, I would say.
I suppose, that is a tough thing to see in someone, as opposed to like a hard skill, like, hey, this person's good at maths, or this person's good at,
It was more like, this guy's a good times guy, and we should have him along. Or I'm so forward, I'll be invited myself along, and then they'll be tolerating me or enjoying me, one way or the other. But it's always been a push down the door, kick down the door type profile, I think, for me, which again is kind of funny that I've ended up being a headhunter and recruiter, because it's just so naturally fits for who I am.
Yeah. And I suppose that's what I'm trying to draw out through this line of questioning, is that causal line between, say, the kid you were at school to what you were doing now. But also, it kind of takes a lot of chutzpah for like a 16-year-old to coldly reach out to an executive and say, hey, I like what you're doing, can we chat about it? It's kind of like, there's a story of Steve Jobs who when he was 13, reached out to one of the founders of Hewlett and Packard and said, hey, you do have a part-time job for me? Yeah. And they're like, yeah, sure. Come on down.
My dad was a real go-getter, grew up sort of middle-class America in LA, sort of like single mom who worked really hard, my grandma. He was like, very much a self-starter, did great degrees, became a chartered accountant, worked at, big consultancies, eventually ended up over here in Australia and sort of climbed up the ranks and eventually into CEO positions. So I had somebody in my court who was very much a go-getter and instilled a lot of confidence in me to go and do these kinds of things, and also enabled me to follow my passions early on. I at one point I thought I wanted to be a DJ. This was kind of before DJs were really cool in a way, I think. Or at least how cool they are now and how accessible it is with the technology it is now. At that time, I was 12 or 11, which would have meant it was around, early 2000s. And
so we're talking like CDs?
CDs and like, So Fresh, summer 2003. I basically, through my dad, I'm sure he set it up for me, but I'd said that I wanted to, get some experience working in a radio station. So he somehow got me like a week or two internship in a radio station, and I went into that dark room amongst all of the all of the equipment and everything else, and it just did not feel right to me. It did not feel good. I didn't love it. I didn't think, great, I'm gonna go and like work my ass off to be a DJ now. I was like, all right, this is one I can cross off as not being a good fit for me. And I do think when I look back on it now, it's like probably because it was an isolating position. The person that I was looking to do their work there did not look like something I wanted to be doing. For me, it was always about people. So,
and I think, well, that is, if I can just, wax lyrical on that, like for me, there's usually this huge misconception of what a job is to what, when the rubber hits the road, what does the day-to-day look like?
Absolutely.
And for me, it was, strategy consulting. Like, that's something I always wanted to do. Because in my mind, I thought, firstly, I've got a degree in engineering, degree in business, yada, yada, yada. I should be a great fit.
Diverse problems, different people. It all sounds super appealing.
Exactly. But when I eventually got the job, what I found was that a lot of time is spent, I think, firstly making sure that your PowerPoints look great. Which drove me fucking nuts.
Not my natural skill set.
And then also, it was the context switching. Like, you're not dealing with one problem at a time. You're dealing with 6 or 7 or 8 different companies, completely different problems, and just bouncing between those exhausted me.
And I've seen, obviously I do a lot of interviews of people. At this point I've interviewed probably thousands of people. I have met so many that are sort of disenchanted with what they thought the role was going to be like over time, or have been ultimately burned out from those kind of environments, both of them, which is obviously a really terrible outcome, especially when it's like really important roles. You know, strategy consultants makes a huge difference to all of our lives and businesses.
Yeah.
And for some reason, you know, these companies largely treat their people really poorly from an hours of expectation point of view, and even compensation in a lot of cases. Yeah. So, yeah, it's tough.
And also I think, like, there's also, what adds to it is this notion of prestige in that, hey, this role is something that people pine for, and, you know, here I am, I should be loving this. But
Big Four. I've made it. I got the hug from the Big Four.
Yeah, it wasn't even the Big Four, but it was just, it was. I think that was also going through my mind, and that I should be loving this. I'm not. Yeah. What's wrong? I think just also with your DJ story, another thing is this notion of, you know, following your passions is something that I don't fully agree with. I think especially like with your story, but also when I was younger, like one of my passions is like cinema and movies, and that's something I really wanted to do.
Same.
And I took a filmmaking course, and although I love the content, I discovered that this is not my tribe. These are not my people. You know, and I there was that huge disconnect there.
Yeah. It's funny. There was never, because I've always been somebody that, you know, success from a financial point of view was important to me, and that was sort of instilled through my, you know, family background and whatnot. But I also have always really wanted to have my own family, which I'm still working on now. Shout out Landon on Hinge if you see me. And I always
didn't think of that, but this could be another side angle for this podcast.
I'm always looking for content for the profile. But yeah, that was super important to me. And I had my best friends literally work in film and television, so I've got to see that whole route. For me, there was never enough stability there and a 9 to 5 that I was really looking for with my plans of having a family even when I was 20. So that's kind of pulled me away from it. But there are those people out there that have natural passions, right? They get to pursue those. I wasn't that person. Like you just heard my story in school. I wasn't into band or music or sports or anything. I guess it was people for me all of the time. So that makes it difficult when coming up with hobbies. And I'm the absolute jack of all trades, master of none. Like pottery, archery, football, soccer, tennis, every kind of activity one could do. I feel like I've done it at this point. And my stick-to-itiveness only comes when it comes to people, video games, and movies and television, which doesn't necessarily lend itself to a very stable, successful career as an easy entry point when you consider how difficult it is to make it in the arts.
For sure. And I think also you can be passionate about things, but I think when you try to derive a living from your passion, that's where I think things could go wrong, because I don't know if you've read The E-Myth by... No. It's one of the better business books I've read, but he gives this example of, you know, a pie maker who loves baking pies, but decides to then open a business baking pies, and that's where things start to crumble. It's a fictional story. Because,
pun intended.
Yeah. But the idea being that, you know, the skill set of baking pies is very different to the skill set of running a business. Yeah. What you should be passionate about is running a business.
I think it's really interesting how many people take their passion and then try and monetize it. Even when you consider all these, I had a lot of friends that were trying to, you know, be in bands when we were in our earlier 20s and things like that. They were always working so hard to try and make that record and get more popular and get to perform at the various festivals and everything else. And I always sort of looked at it at some level of like, why don't you just love what you're doing here instead of trying to make it into something huge? Or these bands would break up because it wasn't working, but it was like, isn't the whole point to just have like a lot of fun and enjoy this in our early 20s?
Yes, yeah. And I think, well, the last thing I say is the direction of passion to what you're doing is not always one direction. So I can be doing something, and by doing it, I become passionate about it.
Yeah, you definitely
It's-
establish passion over time as you invest into something and go deeper.
Anyway, so you were saying that the common thread was that you were kind of passionate about people. Like,
Yeah.
that was the main thing. And then from that, you thought of, okay, HR seems... I mean, you did think of becoming a DJ, but that didn't...
Yeah, exactly.
That didn't work out. But
And I thought about a chef, but I was like, the hours aren't good if I'm going to have family. It was always about family, which is so weird that was so on the mind even when I was a teenager.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
But yeah, people-centric and HR seemed like the right fit. And, meeting new people through talent acquisition being the lens of HR that I was interested in rather than the, onboarding and all the documents that go into it, or even, ER and the legal side of employment is not something that was ever really my passion as much.
Yep.
But it is an amazing job because you can do it from anywhere.
Yeah.
Even for the whole time that I've been doing it, it's been now about 15 years. It's one of those jobs that could be remote very early on and could be done from anywhere. And I can pick up and use that skill set here or in London or in the US or anything, unlike, being a lawyer or a nurse or something like that when there's not so much freedom of movement.
Yep.
So I really was drawn to it for those reasons as well, plus the ability to really be, master of your own domain from an earnings point of view.
Yep.
Being able to make commission and work really hard and see the result of that was really motivating early on. It's brutal as well. Like, talk about a roller coaster is what everybody says about recruitment, and it's super is that way, and it's brutal, which gives you a nice thick skin. But again, as we'll get into it, it's sort of why it's led to me to where I am now today and feel very happily being.
Yeah. So you, based on the advice you got from that executive, you went and studied HR at university?
Yeah, Monash. Yeah.
Yep. What was that like?
I was partying a lot.
Yeah.
To be honest, and was not going to the lectures. I was going to classes, but going to the classes for me was kind of like not really paying attention to the teacher too much, but rather engaging with the students that were there. I was that person in class that was very vocal and tried to galvanize the group towards making the class more entertaining. I had to be there for the attendance marks or whatever, so I didn't fail the class. But I wanted to make it as fun a time as I could being there, and I really sort of did that. Teachers generally liked me as a result of that. But I would go through most of the course not having any idea what the course was even in. And then I would very effectively cram for, the midterms or the end of year assessment, end of semester assessments. So yeah, it was kind of a weird experience to me.
Yeah. Were there any... So while studying HR, was there anything that in what you were taught at university that stood out to you, or no?
Honestly, not really. The lasting memory of that time in classes, I did a study abroad program to LA for about 9 months. And when I was there, I took sign language and astronomy and theater. And I had such incredible teachers when I was over there that were far exceeded the teachers that I have here at Monash, any of them. There was such a passion for what they did there, and they made such a wonderful, warm environment. It was the most amazing part of my uni experience for sure, and it's not just because I was overseas. It's because higher education in the US, while it's disgustingly expensive and inaccessible, they've really got engagement on a much different level than we have it here.
That's interesting. I mean, this is a bit of a selfish question because I'm currently teaching at university here.
Yeah.
What was it about their engagement that was different to here, do you think? Or the way that they went about?
The amount of hours of contact was higher than here. So there was some level of you were spending more time with the people and the teachers than you had at my degree here, because most of my degree was one lecture a week, which I didn't go to, and then a 30 to 50 minute class with the teacher. I think that it just came from the people being the actual personalities, being educators and being really passionate about what they're doing. I found with a lot of my lecturers, it was almost like this was pulling into a job just like any other job, or it was their side piece outside of their career that they would come into. and then know that they were going to be probably dropping out of it, or that they were just being a lecturer for a particular period of time and then not going to be sticking with it, where it felt like a lot of these professors over in the US, might be because of tenure and other things, were much more like lifers about it. But yeah, it's hard to say exactly. It's culturally different. Going to college in the US is not the same as going to university here. Everybody lives on campus. You know, you go and it has the football team and the band and the cheerleaders, and everything is exactly like the movies. It's a stereotype.
Yep.
But it does create an environment that is super different.
Yep.
And when I did go and join Google eventually, you know, part of the way into my career, that felt like stepping back into college again as compared to any other business I did. And it's because they had a lot of co-curricular activities that we did on campus, but mostly because we spent a lot of time with our other colleagues doing things that wasn't work, but having meals there and playing volleyball and all the kinds of things that happens when you go to college in the US. Where here, most people go in and drop into uni for their classes and then leave again.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think, here, like you said, you're there for an hour and then you disperse, you come back. And you know, a lot of the students I teach don't really know each other, you know. And it's something that I try to get going, is just, you know, firstly, you know, I'm teaching business, so part of it is really is networking, you know, start with the people around you. But say during this time, say from your youth to the time you finished uni, did you have a mentor or someone you looked up to? Or
because I worked at the executive search firm for 3-4 years while I was doing my degree, I was working with quite senior people that were already, you know, 10 or even 20 years, 30 years into their careers.
Sorry to go back a bit. You were working while you were studying?
So I got the job 1 to 2 days a week while I was in uni. So I was working with people that were a lot older than me and that had done 20 years of executive search. So there was certainly mentorship that happened throughout that period of time as far as my own career. And there were individual sort of lecturer type people that I ended up quite close with, that I would speak about my sort of vision for my future and get some advice and pieces like that. But I guess the mainstay of my whole life from an advice point of view, certainly down the road of business, has always been my dad. And, you know, my mum's also business savvy as well, but dad was very much in it and working in it. I think some of it all comes from within you, though. You know, do you have the passion to do the thing or not? Do you apply yourself to do it or not? Do you go out and seek the information and find the people and have the conversations? You know? So
while, you know, as per your words, you're partying like hell at uni, I'm guessing you weren't really applying yourself.
No.
But were you applying yourself at the job you were working at? Or?
Yeah. I took it very seriously, and you know, I wore a suit and a tie and everything, and got off the train at Flinders Street and walked down Swanston to Collins and felt like a real adult, and like I was actually like taking the first steps of my career, and was really excited to be there, and it felt like a real thing that mattered a lot more than my uni classes did.
I suppose that was my next question, in that, you know, what was about working that made you apply yourself as opposed to uni, where
I think it was that drive to be successful. That like if I worked hard and got good results, and I definitely care what like people think about the quality of my work, it would lead to great outcomes. When it came to university, you know, I did care about my GPA, and eventually, you know, I finished with like a distinction average or something, which I was really happy to do. But in the beginning, it just felt like it didn't really matter that much whether I got, you know, a credit or a distinction or a high distinction. It's like, what exactly is the difference here? In the same way for me in high school, I kind of struggled to get really great marks until it really mattered. You know, until VCE came along and I was doing my first 3-4 in year 11, which is basically like taking a year 12 class when you're in year 11, and it can count towards your ATAR that then gets you into the university course. Until that happened, I really couldn't take it that seriously, because I was like, the ramifications of working really hard versus not really didn't make any difference to me, or at least I couldn't see that it made much of a difference. I wasn't that person chasing like the gold star. Unfortunately.
That's interesting. You know, you're thinking back to my university as well. I struggled first couple of years, and it was only really in the last couple that kind of like you, that I made my, GPA jump. But I think similar to you, it was just this sense of maybe ennui in a way that I didn't see. Maybe the feedback wasn't immediate enough. Kind of like when you're in a job, you're told immediately if you're not doing a good job,
and you're getting paid
and
at
you're
the
getting
same
paid,
time.
you're getting a bonus.
It's a lot more motivating than university. It's such a delay in gratification.
Yeah.
But also just the way that it's taught. My particular degree, it was like, and a lot of them, here is a textbook that is 500 pages. We're going to have you memorize it and go through as much of this as you possibly can, then regurgitate it, and then dump it by the side of the road for the next semester.
Yeah.
And largely forget most of it.
Yep.
And, high school is a very similar way as well. That, to me, was never a great way of learning for myself. I was more of like a hands-on kind of learner, an engagement learner with other people, as I've said. So it just didn't really suit me very much to be engaged with that as something that really felt good. I think for a lot of people feel the exact same way.
Yeah.
And you take all these classes where it's like, what am I even doing this for? Especially in high school, that it's like, I'm never going to remember or use any of this.
Yeah.
Which is a real comment about our education system and how much it is not setting any of us up for success in a real world.
Yeah, well, the best quote I heard about education is by the guy who wrote The Little Prince. I think Antoine Saint-Exupéry said, if you want to teach people shipbuilding, you don't start with teaching them to gather the wood, nail it together, etc. You teach them about the endless majesty of the ocean.
Yeah.
Once they understand that, then the rest becomes easier. But going back to your work experience at uni, were there lessons there that you feel are still lasting?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think early on in career, for a lot of younger people, it is about sort of rushing through the work and trying to get it done as quickly as you can so that you can prove that you're effective, I think, to some level, as well as just trying to get things done, I suppose. And there was some feedback at some point about quality over speed. And it was a little bit tough because I was only in there 1 or 2 days a week because of my uni course. It felt like I often had I've got 1 day to nail this. But there was feedback around doing that, looking at the quality piece over quantity, which definitely has made a lasting impact for me as far as when I think about the work. Ultimately, when it comes to HR, especially talent acquisition, if I'm not really paying attention, I could miss the right candidate. I could miss the all-star candidate that is right there. And it's really led to me always being quite dedicated to doing the job right for my clients and making sure that I can stand by my work in a way that did definitely come from that period of time. I actually started my career when I was about 10 with a business called Landon's Lollies, where I was buying lollies in bulk and was repackaging and rebranding them and then going door to door and selling candy, which was is problematic now. Probably people wouldn't really do that, but in the 90s that was all the rage. So that was great. And then I eventually got a job underage at Nando's, where I was working in the kitchen. I'm now vegetarian, but I was working in the kitchen, dislocating chicken's wings and laying them on racks and working as a chef.
Wow.
When I was 13 underage, which was illegal and stuff. But it was anyway. I eventually ended up at Hoyt's, where I worked for years as well, for 3 years in a cinema, and I love cinemas.
Yeah.
But I did all those jobs that were good work, but didn't really matter the quality of my work very much.
Yes.
Whereas the quality of my work in my actual job at the executive search firm really made a huge difference to the outcomes of that business. And they made sure that I knew that and felt that, and that I was having good impact for them. And they were very thankful for the work I did there. So it was definitely a really great start to a professional career.
Yeah, wow. So then let's move forward a bit. You're working at this firm, you're doing uni, you finished uni.
Yep.
What happens next?
I get a job at Spotless, the facilities management company, as a graduate.
Yeah.
It was a sort of rotating management sort of role, but it was reporting into the group COO, which was kind of ridiculous, an amazing opportunity where I was going to get to sit and be under somebody who was like a serious leader, and I think it was like a 4 billion pro rata company at the time or something like that. And they were flying me out to mine sites to interview people and trying to get them onto different contracts. And they were having me look at a lot of like really significant P&Ls to find savings and things that we could be optimizing within those contracts. So it went from like one environment, which was the executive search firm, which was quite a boutique agency, into like a big company where I was looking at stuff that felt like it was way beyond my years of experience to actually be doing.
Yeah.
But also super fun.
Yep.
It was just a year program. And I intended to move overseas the whole time. So I never looked to stay with them, but just had a really fun year doing, I guess, intro to business in a big way.
Yeah, wow. Sorry, maybe this is a couple of steps ahead, but you did mention you're working for Google.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
I went over to London and lived there for a couple of years. I joined a recruitment agency over there and sort of helped develop a bit of an executive search practice within that business.
Yep.
We were helping US-based startups expand internationally around the world. So I ended up, interviewing thousands of people in 25 different countries and hiring people all over the world, which was super interesting from a cultural point of view. London is super rough, though, to live there from a weather point of view.
Yes.
And as well as working hours and daylight hours and all those kinds of things. So after a couple of years there, I decided I wanted to move to LA and live there again, where I'd been at college and have some sunshine and be in a family. I moved with the same business there and was working sort of remotely, helping US-based startups still. I just happened to get hit up by a headhunter from Google to join the business to help hire product managers and engineers and engineering leaders for their cloud business. It was really up and coming at that time, as well as diversity and inclusion is a big spin up. So they're investing heavily into talent acquisition folks that could come and help them do that. So anyway, I got the hit up to do that, and I was like, wow, I never even dreamed of working at Google.
Yeah.
It was not on my radar in any way whatsoever, but I was like, well, this is like the mecca of, a culture at the very least of a business that is meant to be like the best culture in the world. So I was like, all right.
Around what year is this?
This is 2017.
Okay.
So I was like, all right, I'm going to go to Google and go do that. I mean, I thought I'd just try the interviews and wasn't going to get the job, and I ended up getting the job, which was awesome. But I went up and started in San Francisco at their, Mountain View head office and started doing that, which was, amazing. It was interesting because the culture was definitely a very warm culture, but was also like an extremely politically correct sort of hive mind mentality place that didn't necessarily suit me as the polarizing figure I've told you that I am.
Yeah.
But the amenities around you there are so tasty, all the meals you could eat.
Yeah.
If you're listening to this, you're not seeing me, but I'm slightly chubby, and I certainly enjoyed the food I was eating there.
Yeah.
And all the sports and everything else. It was a really great environment, but my role was really siloed. I was working on a very small problem in a much, much, much bigger machine, and that was really different from where I'd been in my career for the most of my time that I've been doing it, and I felt my impact really dropping.
So what was your role within Google?
I was doing talent acquisition as well as working on sort of talent programs.
So you mentioned for the cloud.
Yeah, for the cloud business.
Yep.
They were hiring site reliability engineers is what I started working on initially. They have more, at the time, they had more talent acquisition people working on that profile than any other role within Google at that time. It was meant to be like the hardest one to hire, which is interesting. The site reliability engineers are the one that keep Google running at the 99.99 that we all know and expect. When your internet's not working, you type in Google typically to find out,
Yeah. So that was your main role, just hiring that one position.
Yeah, and it was specifically trying to hire. There was a big diversity and inclusion initiative at the time, so there was working on ways that we could be engaging talent in those underrepresented areas, which for Google at the time for tech was Black, women X, as well as Latinx people.
Okay, so how did you go about that?
It was a mixture of like active outreach and identification of those populations via things like, GitHub and Google and everything else and LinkedIn, where it was also a lot of events running, of setting up, events for diversity and inclusion focused things, which could be at a particular location that was more densely populated by diverse populations, or specifically doing outreach and invitations to people from diverse backgrounds. But yeah, that work is meaningful. That work feels really good.
Yep.
and it eventually led me to my next role as well, if we want to keep moving along the chain.
But just a question on that. Especially this thing around DEI, were you looking for engineers who are qualified as engineers, or could someone be, at the time, could someone be self-taught, have a GitHub profile?
The interesting at Google, because of my background in executive search, I was able to come in and somewhat expand what their definition of an SRE was and open up that to being a lot more other kinds of engineers that could fit doing the SRE work that didn't necessarily have that traditional background. It did lead to a lot of success for me on that team, somewhat unprecedented success, I think, at the time. But Google obviously has a very high bar, is how they refer to it, of where they expect people to get to pass the interviews, and very rigorous interview processes. So there's some level of they could have any kind of background, but ultimately they'd need to pass those interviews and tests. And those interviews and tests are really, a lot of the times, designed for the kind of problems that you tackle in a university environment, not in a real world environment. So it meant that people from traditional backgrounds that have went to Berkeley or wherever were going to succeed in those interviews a lot more than candidates that were maybe great engineers but didn't have the same educational background.
So I suppose that's the conundrum then, especially with minority populations like Black, Latino, etc. To get through a Berkeley or an MIT or what have you.
I don't think it's not an unwillingness, especially in these places, to look at people that don't have those backgrounds, but ultimately the ability to get through the process was really difficult. This was a lot more pronounced and I don't know, something analyzed by me when I was at Airbnb, though, which was my next role after this. It was down in LA. They were starting a brand new office for Airbnb experiences. And I wanted to move back to LA to be near fam and everything else. So I took a role with them, helping to build that office up. That one was still very much focused on engineers and things like that for the business, but DE&I was also huge there as well, and a big push as it was across the whole US and expanding the whole world largely, obviously, at this stage. But that one was a much smaller business. It was, Airbnb was still pre-IPO at that time, and it meant that everything was a lot less defined than the machine and behemoth that is Google. So we were going through and doing similar approaches of trying to find diverse candidates by background with the whole events that we were running, as well as active engagement. What I found is I was getting a lot of candidates that were coming through the process and were interested in working at Airbnb, but the pass-through rates or the success rates of those interviews as compared to general population candidates was massively reduced. They were passing through those, just my data I was collecting, but there was hundreds of people that had interviewed, was passing through at half the rate at the first stage, and then a massive drop-off after that at the more complex on-site stages.
You mean the
people from traditional backgrounds that would have gone to, done a computer science degree at a good college, etc. And largely were often more like white male type profiles. As well as Asian male was a huge population as well within the tech community and software engineers. As compared to, again, the diverse groups were largely women, Black X and Latinx candidates. So I saw a huge problem here, especially when my job is to hire these people. But it was also we are building up the hopes and dreams of these people, saying that we care so much about inclusion and diversity, and we want diverse thought, and diverse thought leads to diverse products and all those things, which I fully agree with. We were building up the hopes and dreams of these people, but putting them into a system that was set up for them to largely not succeed or not be prepared to succeed in. And whether you believe that or not, at the end of the day, the results showed way less people making it through the process. When they were working in great jobs and were talented engineers, no doubt, from their side, and even when hiring managers really wanted to hire people like this. So it led to a lot of work.
So was it the interview process itself, or did you find that people who maybe weren't so good at the skill of interviewing were perhaps good at the job, or is there a correlation there?
It's definitely multifaceted. I think
Yeah.
the interviews are set up for people from specific backgrounds at that time. I can't speak to it anymore, but
Yep.
it was partly that they're just not tackling the sort of like algorithmic problem solving things and problems that are floated to the candidates during that sort of high pressure interviews. I think as well there was some level of people often like to hire people that they know or people that look like they have the background that they have, or they've had referrals that have come through. So there was a lot of the time we're up against battling. The hiring manager already liked X candidate they know through X person on their team, and they want to hire them. So there's already like a lot of work being done to try and get other candidates coming through before then. And then another big problem with the whole process is if you advertise a role, you get a certain amount of people applying to the role, and you get them through the process, and then you're making a decision on the candidate in a lot of cases, unless you're actively headhunting for it as well. The diverse candidate populations in a lot of cases were not actively applying to those roles. So we would need to be opening up the role and doing active head hunting and engagement and doing events and all these kind of things to try and drive pipeline into the role to then open up the role to then take them through at the same time to have a comparative, candidate.
Yep.
That was a huge undertaking. It takes a lot of commitment from a business that wants to hire somebody ASAP to tell them, actually, can you not open the role for a month and a half so that we can actually try and drive some pipeline towards this from diverse backgrounds? You need a business that's really wanting to do that and valuing and prioritizing that.
So I suppose then, just with the interview process, can you give like an example where, or maybe not an example, but just a way of how these interviews are set up for the general population rather than people from diverse backgrounds, or what were the real stumbling blocks for?
I think the thing is, it's really different as per the role.
Yep.
Is it a technical role that has technical interviews, or is it not? So it's hard to say that there's a catch-all example for this.
Yep.
But people are attracted to people that speak a common language to them, that have similar backgrounds to them and everything. It's a it's a particular bias, like the halo bias and whatever. One of those is for the same one. And it just naturally sets these people up to have less success, or it can be that they just not had the same amount of preparation as other candidates, because those colleges, know exactly the type of businesses that are hiring out of their college, and they do training and development for the people to be set up for those.
Yep.
Or those people have just come from maybe higher education places. They speak, maybe English better or more properly than, other candidates, and that naturally brings in bias of people that aren't, adept at diversity and inclusion hiring. So it's a lot of different problems that go into it, but at the end of the day, it has to be something that's a priority, and then there has to be systems that are set up to make it successful. And that takes, every system, the result of every system is somewhat perfectly set up already to get that result, right? So if you don't have the results coming through that you're looking for, or diversity and inclusion being at the level that you're looking at, that you're hoping to achieve, let's say, then you really need to be looking at what is the system we have set up at the moment, and A, B, C, D, E test things to try and change that and make a difference to the bottom line of what you're achieving.
Wow. That reminds me of, have you heard of Adam Grant?
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know if you've read his book, Hidden Potential. It's one of his I think it's his latest book. But something just struck me was when he mentions, if you have two candidates with exactly the same GPA, but one of the candidates comes from a lower middle class background, has had to really hustle, has had to work 20, 30 hours a week to support himself while studying, but still managed a respectable GPA. That's kind of not reflected in the CV or in the interview process per se. It's but and I suppose that really, comes down to the hiring process as well. In that, you're right. Like, say a site reliability engineer is almost like a critical position. Like, we need these guys yesterday or girls yesterday. But then, how do you truly gauge a person?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what's actually really nice about it is I've been doing this for, almost 15 years now. I've worked with 50 plus companies. For the most part, people are quite open-minded to the backgrounds that people might have, at least the people I work with. And sometimes you really need to massage that or into them like a punching bag. But, the hiring on needing to a certain GPA from a certain college is certainly become way less important in most environments as time has gone on. And people are a lot more accepting of people could have any kind of different backgrounds. Or in the case that you just spoke about with Adam Grant, it's obviously that other candidate sounds fantastic, that background. I think it really comes down to designing your interview process to uncover those kind of elements and see the holistic skill set that somebody might have, as well as transferable skill sets. That is more the problem, I found. It's not so much that the certain person needs to have exactly this kind of background or GPA. It's we need somebody that can do X, Y, Z. And generally the people that are evaluating that have a really tight box defined as to what that is, and the person needs to have previously done exactly these things in a very similar environment, or they largely don't want to invest the time in developing or recognizing that they could actually quite easily transfer this person's skills into one that makes sense for us. That has been more of the battle of my career, I would say, and certainly a battle for a lot of people out there that are looking for jobs. Than exactly what education background you have.
Yeah. I think another thing is, this is something I've been thinking about, is there's a quote that's attributed to Peter Drucker, but it's, hire for character, train for skill. And to me, what that means is just gauging a person for who they are, taking into account their strengths, their values, but also knowing your company's values. Not just the ones that are plastered on, or carved into marble, but the true values that drive behavior. And does this person match those?
I work with a lot of startups over the last years now. I've been an external consultant to startups. I do try and spend a lot of time around the company and understand exactly what their sort of ethos is and what their values are that they may have already have written down somewhere, or we help develop those together, but actually see that those are reflected in the people that are working there and the way that they're treating each other. And then when you think about actually interviewing these people and bringing them through, that you really are trying to get a good sense of the person and are they going to be successful in this environment or not. When you work with sort of classic recruitment and external recruiters, especially that are just getting paid like a percentage of base salary, etc., there's a lot more of like, we need somebody that can do XYZ skills, and then they're finding somebody out there that they can just sort of like jam into that position, right? And they're going to do everything they can to get that placement, to make their budgets and everything else for these recruitment agencies. I've always, for these last years, worked largely just on an hourly basis with the clients, where I get to really understand their culture, really understand who would be the right fit. The last thing I want to do is put in somebody there that is not going to be successful, obviously, for both sides. I really don't want to put in somebody there that's just not suited to the team. And I think when you're a really skilled, recruiter or HR person, etc., and even, people manager and everything, interviewer, you're good at at developing a warm connection with somebody and understanding exactly what makes them tick and what they're passionate about, where they want to go in their career, and all those things that lay outside of the exact skill set or background that they have, that are the intangibles that really make the difference of the great person in your startup or company or not. And most of these founders, they want somebody that can wear lots of hats and be scrappy and all these kinds of things. And a lot of people say that is them, or that it's not them perhaps, but do they actually have the motivational background and the discipline and all of these kinds of things to do those things that are required in a startup environment or not?
So maybe just going back to your experience, you mentioned your experience with Google and then Airbnb that we kind of skipped over. Those are, on anyone's CV, those are massive gold stars to have.
Thank you.
But I suppose if you can sum up was it 4 years in total between the two?
A few years,
Those few years in big tech, what do you take away from that? Are there, why did you leave? Was there a sense of disillusionment?
I think really wonderful environments to work in, especially both of them had amazing offices, amazing amenities, amazing food and all that stuff. The people were super duper friendly for the most part as well. I had been in much smaller environments, so from an impact point of view, that was massively reduced. There's so much more red tape, there's so much more bureaucracy, that really just didn't suit me overall, I think. But it was still great environments, but ultimately in a life where I'm trying to get the most experience, make the most impact, make the most difference in the world, I just didn't feel like those sort of larger environments was the right fit for me. And I mean, I finished with Airbnb because of COVID happened. They laid off 40% of their staff or whatever. But, you know, I was not, even at that time, I was not satisfied after, you know, a year and a bit being there. I was like looking for how I could more, I was interviewing and like at least speaking to like not-for-profits to try and see how I could transition my career into actually making more of an impact in a meaningful way. I discovered through being at these places that despite getting paid really well and having, you know, every kind of amenity and great people working with me and everything else, at the end of the day, it's about like the impact of what you're doing that, at least for me, was the differentiator. It wasn't enough to be in a wonderful culture and have those benefits. It actually needed to be that I was growing in my role, in my career to some degree, but even more importantly, that what I was doing meant something. And obviously that's a lot more pronounced now with people, and people are aware that they want to try and do that kind of thing or impact. But getting all of the good stuff and realizing that it doesn't make me whole is been like a wonderful part of my career that I'm so thankful that I got to go to those places more than anything, to have those experiences and realize that working my ass off to trying to get to one of those places is actually not what it should be about at all.
So then just your view on HR, talent acquisition, you know, setting people up. How would you like to see this industry evolve?
I think it's about giving people more of a chance. I think it would be for me. So often we're looking for exactly somebody who's done exactly the thing before in a competitor that would be the right fit and everything like that. I've always been in and tried to advocate for people that are outside of the box. And a lot of the time, those people are the best people that get the role and I fought for them, and I fought the hiring manager to get them through and actually give them a chance. And they've ended up being like the best hires. Like that happens a lot of the time. So I think people having more of an open mind to what kind of background could be the right fit for the role, as well as being willing to invest the time and energy into training somebody up, would be really important to me. But also looking at the skill sets outside of the core job that they're trying to hire for. Like one of my best friends here has won awards for like cultural impact within a business. You know, he's been in leadership roles. He's been really successful in his career, but I think the big standout for him is he is a massive cultural ad. Like any business would be lucky to have this person in their business to galvanize the people towards a common mission and things like that. And most of the time that somebody's going through the interview process, they're not looking for those skill sets at all, which is actually the thing that's going to make the biggest difference between two people that are actually kind of similarly going to be effective in their role.
And I think that's the thing. It's some of the best people I've worked with, what they possess is this sense of perspective, you know, a sense of discernment, even humor, you know. And I'm guessing that those would be very hard to pick out in an application process.
I think you just need to be willing to invest the time with people, which a lot of the time people aren't. They want to get the interviews done as quickly as possible, hire the person as quickly as possible. But if you really do invest those time, you can uncover, you know, wonderful people. I also think this is so random, but through all these environments I've been in, one thing that you typically don't see is people that are like slightly more on in their career. And certainly people that are like, you know, late 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Those kind of people are never walking around tech environments. Everybody wants to replicate having the sort of...
The 22-year-olds.
Yeah, the 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds. That's always been not good for me. It's not what I like. I would love to see those people engaged and working, obviously, so that they're not relying on... They're not disengaged with our society. They're not relying on societal funds to support themselves and all those other things. But there is just so much wealth of information and knowledge to be learned from people that have been in the you know, various industries for decades. and as well as being such cultural adds. A bunch of 20-year-olds would be really wonderful to have them mixing with 40-year-olds
yes.
and 50-year-olds.
Yeah.
The maturing element that can come through those kind of working environments is huge. I experienced it myself in my career. Thank God I started working amongst like industry veterans. It made such a huge difference for me.
Yep.
And there is not enough advocating for that going on. And largely, it's a group that is totally okay to dismiss.
Yep.
You know, if it was various underrepresented minorities in other cases, even if that's just say like women in tech roles, that to not look at that talent now is really quite unacceptable, and something that a hiring manager would even not do because they just know that they're not meant to do that, and it's culturally not appropriate.
Yeah.
Elderly and more older workers, not even elderly, but just older workers, 40s, 50s, 60s, they are looked over massively, and people don't feel bad about doing it at all because it's not on the, it's not a cultural pulse moment in any way.
Yeah, yeah. And it's not, I suppose, lack of a better word, the sexy hire.
It's not the sexy hire.
Yeah.
And there's also a lot of concerns about them being culturally not the right fit, as well as maybe being a bit, archaic in their opinions about things and possibly going to get into some sort of HR trouble or not mesh well with people, etc.
Yeah.
That is a really bloody broad brush to be painting the entire boomer population with. Those damn boomers, can't wait for them to get out of leadership roles. But also, my folks are boomers. Great people.
Exactly.
They're good people.
And I think maybe just people just love using brushes and these broad strokes.
We want people to fit into their nice boxes, and we want everything to be nice and equal and even and all those kinds of things. But it's obviously not the case for humanity.
Yeah.
So,
and it's the same, boomers might say, Gen Z, they're this and they're that. But having worked with Gen Z, they're freaking awesome.
Every different age group has something to offer for sure, and has good sides and bad sides to them, no doubt. But I think, an openness to look at people that don't necessarily have the exact fit of what you imagine would be what I would love. Obviously, it makes my job easier as a recruiter, but it's about giving people opportunity. I want people to have that opportunity. I've always been really passionate about advocating for people to have a fair chance, which is partly why when I was working in these places where we were really focused on DE&I and they're going through a process that is not setting them up for success and really isn't set up fairly given different backgrounds, it felt really bad to be a part of that. And I'd much rather be involved in shaping the interview processes and designing the interview processes to allow for equal opportunity, which is why working the last 3-4 years with all these different startups now allows me to do that. And now I'm taking it one step further where I get to give 20% of my time / money to charities and not-for-profits and things. I can really make a difference in an environment where they largely wouldn't typically get to work with somebody with my kind of background, which now feels different levels of exciting.
This might be, so maybe just going back to your story as we kind of wrap up here, but I think, one thing about you is, I'm not sure how to frame this, but
extremely dateable. Is that what you're thinking?
Get on Hinge, people. But also, I mean, you come from a very privileged background. You went to grammar school. Your dad,
I took the silver spoon out of my mouth for this conversation. Yes.
I suppose the question is then, how do you think about your privilege? How do you reconcile your privilege with what you're doing now?
I definitely do acknowledge it and recognize that it has led me to being where I am in a big way. The pedigree of the schools I went to and things like that. I always lean back on my upbringing with my dad, though. Like, the reason I am as successful as I am or have been through my career or anything else, I attribute that to him more than any degree that I did or school that I went to or anything, especially when you consider how disengaged I was in those environments. You really can't look at those as the reasons for my success. But I guess I definitely acknowledge it, and it makes me think I need to do more to help the world and give back and give people opportunities, which has been very present through my whole career. I would much rather try and recruit the people that didn't go to the kind of environments that I had. or give the people that didn't go to those environments the opportunity to come through and be a colleague and advocate for them being a colleague. I think, you know, it's so important for all of us to look outside of our own backgrounds and people that are like us and had experiences like us to find the folks that need a little bit more sort of help to get there in the minds of people that are making these decisions.
Cool. Thank you for that.
What do you think?
Yeah, it's something I've thought about as well. And also, I come from a privileged background, although I grew up in India.
Yeah.
In Mumbai. And yeah, I was super lucky growing up. You know, I had all the opportunities. But also what was really brought home to me through my parents was how lucky we are. And I suppose growing up in India, what's really stark is the dichotomy, you know. There's really rich people, there's people literally living on the streets right in front of you.
Yeah.
So that was always brought home as to how lucky we are, how privileged we are. And so I think all that I've been through, there's a bit of that in me.
Yeah. It definitely, like, I was just spent 6 weeks in India, and absolutely, it's so much more a part of your life there. We live in Melbourne, we live in such a wonderful society where everybody's living a lot more closer to a similar kind of lifestyle, less spread of, wealth, as you find in India, or at least you're not seeing it as much here. And it definitely makes you feel a lot more gratitude for your life and the things that you do have, and kind of sickened by people not satisfied with what we do have here, and certainly drives that wanting to have impact, wanting to do things for the world, wanting to give back, because I guess at the end of the day you feel some sense of responsibility and or guilt to do something with the opportunities you've been afforded.
And you know, I think not only that, but I'm also hugely privileged in the family I come from. We're all very close, you know. I can depend on them, so I don't take any of that for granted. And kind of like you, it's what I'm doing with this podcast and what I do is really how can people find meaning in the work that they do. And I guess from meaning, there is a bit of privilege associated with that, in that to find meaning in the work, firstly, you have to have a job. You have to have your basics taken care of.
A support network to support family or anything else.
And all of that. But at the end of the day, it's then to derive true meaning, it has to come from a place of contribution. Like money, I love money. I have a lifestyle that I love, that I want to uphold. But at the end of the day, what does my life stand for besides those things? You know?
Yeah, I think people should feel really empowered to go after it. Like, step outside of the norms and go after it. I wrote to that executive search firm when I was 16 to try and find out what was involved. I did that at 18 to get a job there. When I moved to London, I reached out to the CEO of the recruitment agency I joined. Google hit me up, but then Airbnb, I reached out to Airbnb to set up their LA office. When I came back here, I did similar reaching out to get involved in consultancy. Now I've gone and set up my own one as well, where I've been actively reaching out to everybody to come and work with me. That's partneringkind.org. Come and work with me. But
we'll put it in the
it's like go boldly after the things that you want to do, and especially from an impact point of view. Like, if you feel like you have spare time or resources or skill sets, or in some way want to find more meaning and impact in your life, go out and do those things and make it happen. There's lots of companies out there that are trying to help facilitate that. We both know one Volley that I've been working with recently that is trying to like help the volunteering process, which certainly needs a lot of help after I've tried to do a lot of it myself this year. But I think really, like, there are opportunities out there. You can have whatever kind of meaning and impact you want to have out in the world. Truly, it is only limited by how much you put yourself out there and go after these things.
Yeah, I think 100%. And I think also the reason meaningful work is important to me is that in the first instance, what's important is a meaningful life. And that could come from various facets, family, what you do outside of work. But I think the tragedy is we work, 40 hours a week. That adds up to more than 100,000 hours over the course of a life.
Yeah.
Do something with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And in those environments, demand that more is done. As an employee, we have so much power, truly. With our employers work really hard to keep us there a lot of the time.
Yeah.
A lot of these environments, they're working quite hard to keep you there and keep you happy and keep you engaged and all those kind of things. We can band together as employees, not that I'm one anymore, but you can, and advocate for the things that you want to be doing. If you want to be doing more volunteering time, raise that with other people and have your manager sign on to do a volunteering day or whatever it is. You want to give back services, partner with different companies, like advocate within the environment that you're in or within what you can reach for yourself.
100%. I think also what people don't do is just ask for what they want. It doesn't have to be asking for a promotion or asking for a salary, but maybe you enjoy certain aspects of the work and others you don't. Advocate for the stuff you like doing. And
I think I'm so thankful for having the American dad in me because it has made me somebody who's I'm either wonderful to serve at a restaurant or awful because I'm happy to send back food and tell you what I think. But it does allow you to have this real confidence to always speak up for the things that you want to do, want to impact. When I was at Airbnb, Brian Chesky, the CEO, was coming through our office, which was a huge deal. He's definitely a rock star within the business area and certainly a semi-rock star within the startup landscape.
This is in business in general, I suppose.
Yeah. And now a lovely billionaire. I still have a lot of Airbnb stock. Let's book on some Airbnb trips, everybody. But he was in the office and I went over to him and pulled him aside to chat to him about what I was experiencing and showed him the data that I was collecting on the diverse candidates going through the interview process versus Gen Pop. And boy, that was quite scary to do that. But at the same time, I just went in there with confidence and gusto and chatted to him about it and got some advice from him and got some direction. And through that same level of kind of pushing, I ended up getting in front of the person that was running diversity and people at Airbnb, which was pretty huge, as well as some other leadership. And they were genuinely looking at my report that I put together, that I just decided to put together to make a difference, and through having boldness actually made an impact in that area that otherwise I wouldn't have done if I didn't have the confidence to go out and do it. Which is a very self-promotional story, but at the end of the day, it's just to say that you really, if you're bold and you speak up and you put yourself out there, the sky's the limit.
Yeah, and I suppose just on that, this podcast is finding meaning in work. That it does not mean you have to start your own company or be an entrepreneur to find that. I think within a job, if you ask the right questions, if you advocate for what you're good at, you will be able to find meaning. And I think, Dan Pink, he wrote a book called Drive, which is about motivation, but also he advocates, he says, each job should have three things. Autonomy, in that you should be able to solve problems the way you see fit and not be micromanaged. 2, mastery, you have to have the sense that you're getting better. Where it could be your skills, it could be soft skills, etc. Or 3, a sense of purpose, in that the job should be more than just a paycheck. I think that's a good starting point for anyone working in a 9-to-5, that if you can engineer those three things within your role, you will be able to find meaning in what you do.
And you don't need to make a right-hand turn either. It's slightly turn the car in the direction that you want it to go, and slowly over time have more impact or have more of a voice or whatever it is. You don't have to make these changes overnight. It's the same when people get back into exercise. They go out for the 10K run and they kill themselves and they can't do it. It's no, start small, start slow. if your business is not necessarily like the one you're working for is not necessarily that social impact leaning at the moment, have them do one day of like the quarter where we're going to do something, and then slowly it can become like a monthly thing that you're doing, etc.
Yeah. And also, to say it, like to find meaning, it does not necessarily have to have a social angle to what
Not
you're
at all.
doing. Yeah.
Not at all. It's just something that I've been sort of driving towards lately for my own
It's important to
sake.
you and me, but it does not have to be...
It could be anything. It could literally be anything that you're passionate about, for sure. I think just go after it, you know? Go after the things that you want in life and go after it with confidence and boldly, and like, it's that whole quote about not wanting to be the timid souls that are neither marred by defeat.
It's not the critic that counts. It's
It's Roosevelt.
Person in the arena.
Is it Roosevelt?
It's Roosevelt.
Teddy Roosevelt. Yeah, it's like that has been an impactful quote in my life, and I'm like, go after it. Be the one that toils.
But also, I should say that, unlike you, confidence doesn't come naturally to me. Like, I'm more introverted.
Yeah.
And I usually kind of stew and let things, boil over.
Yeah.
But I'd say that what's helped me is just pushing the envelope just that little bit, just taking the smallest risk.
Suit your skill sets, If you are a little bit more quiet, introverted, etc., but you're great with data, great. Get that data together, put the report together, and send it over an email instead, or whatever it is. Like you can do whatever it might be that suits your skill set, for sure.
Cool. Well, Landon, this has been great. Final question: how do you find meaning in your work?
Well, that's been honestly quite a journey, which has brought me to, Partner in Kind at this point. When I help people, it feels really good.
Yeah.
And that can be helping people with my expertise or my experience. It could be helping advocate for people getting a chance at a job, or just actually interviewing somebody that's applied, or whatever it is. At the end of the day, it's helping people. And so now I've tried to set up this business where no matter what I'm doing, I know 20% of my time, which is generally paid for, is going to go towards some great outcome no matter what.
Yeah.
And that's really exciting to me. I get to do what I love and I'm good at doing and having that impact, but also getting to do the social piece that I've really cared about, but often felt was missing. As much as people have tried to do it, it's really hard to have an impact, obviously.
Cool. Well, this has been quite the chat, Landon. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
I really appreciate it, and I'll see you on Hinge, everybody.
All right. Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you're enjoying and are learning from this podcast, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. A great zero-cost way to support us is to leave a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you are feeling extra generous, it'd be great if you could leave a comment or feedback on our Apple Podcast or YouTube pages. Or you could email your comments and feedback to me directly at rahul@disruptivebusinessnetwork.com. That's RAHUL at disruptivebusinessnetwork, all one word, .com. Finally, a big shout out to our producer Dan Scahill for his work on the keys, and to Vashti Civil for writing the original music for our theme. Until next time, this is your host, Rahul Sones, signing off. Bye.